The Central Bank of Nigeria has lifted the limit on cash deposits and raised the weekly cash withdrawal ceiling to 500,000 naira for individuals and 5 million naira for corporates, up from 100,000 naira. Now, the changes announced in a circular signed by Dr. Rita CK will take effect from January 1, 2026. Now, the CBN said that this is part of the measures and revisions aimed at reducing cash management costs, enhancing security, and curbing money laundering risks, while reflecting Nigeria's current economic realities. Now, ATM withdrawals remain capped at 100,000 naira daily and 500,000 naira weekly. And excess withdrawals will attract charges of about 3% for individuals and 5% for corporates. And banks, according to the CBN, must load all denominations in ATMs and file monthly compliance reports. So to help us discuss this and understand this better is Samuel Oyekanmi, Lead Research and Insights at Norrenberger. Thank you so much, Samuel, for coming around.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. So with the latest removal of cash deposit limits and upward review of weekly withdrawal limits from 1,000 naira to about 500,000 naira, is the CBN actually pushing for a more cashless society now than ever? And is it also doing it the right way?
Yeah, I think pretty much that's what the CBN is trying to do. It just take me back to about 2-3 years ago during the Mayfield's era, when we also had some kind of push like that in a bid to reduce the cash level of cash transactions that we have in Nigeria, trying to also push for a lot more digital transactions. But then again, to look at the context of what the CBN has mentioned, right, one of them is that individuals and corporate bodies now can deposit any amount of cash, which pretty much directly benefits businesses, traders, and individuals who would largely deal with large amount of cash. Of course, with the initial caveats, they had a limit on what they could deposit or have to pay fees. But now that that has been removed and there's no cap, it incentivizes a lot more of businesses who would rather deal with cash initially to now deposit that funds with the banks, and that belief is that that's also going to help drive significantly the amount of currency outside the purview of the bank. Yes, to the question, I believe that's exactly what the CBN is trying to do, push a lot more of that cashless mindset to the Nigerian economy.
Now, we see that the Apex Bank had enforced tighter cash controls for years and is trying to improve on that. But then when you look at Nigeria's infrastructure, would you say that it is adequately optimized to transit into that digital era of cashless policy and cashless transactions, where we see that monies are being transacted via, virtual platforms rather than physical cash being used?
Yeah, I think that remains a very sticky point when you look at the Nigerian economy and markets generally. Of course, a number of Nigerians still prefer to deal in cash. According to the NBS, about 42.5% of the Nigerian economy is still largely informal, and most of these informal sectors they rather deal with cash. But then again, if you remember, like I said, during Emefiele's era, one of the issues that we had with the policy was that the infrastructure was not robust enough to handle the amount of virtual and digital transactions that we had to deal with at that point. Compared to now, of course, there's been a huge growth development from then, but I think there's still a long way to go, because even up until now, we still have some times where a number of these mobile applications for the different banks and fintechs and virtual wallets still fail as a result of either technological lapses or the fact that their IT infrastructure is just not robust enough to handle that amount of traffic. But then again, do we want to wait for 10-20 years when we'll be able to have that kind of infrastructure? I don't think the development or advancement will happen that way. Of course, we have seen some level of development in the last few years. When you have this form of policies, it also helps you to drive and force the hands of the stakeholders in that industry to ensure that what needs to be done is done, and then we are able to improve on our infrastructure. But right now, do we have enough? No. But compared to where we used to be, is it better? Definitely yes. Can we do more? I think definitely we need to do better. But then I think the policy is probably just right.
Okay, so we understand that Nigeria's market is mostly dominated by the informal sector. And now we're seeing that the CBN is trying to ensure the removal of excess deposit fees, for people who would want to probably deposit their money in the banks. But do you think that that would be encouraging for individuals, small businesses who are more concerned, are more comfortable with transacting with physical cash to want to now take their monies to the bank?
Yeah, of course. Like I said, it incentivizes businesses with large cash to deposit their money. But of course, what it has also done is that it incentivizes people to be able to withdraw. And that's like the balance of what the CBN is trying to do. Encourage people to bring the funds into the bank, but then you don't have that same amount of bandwidth to be able to take out those cash, which again, I think might also bring some form of, we could see some downside there, because despite these policies, I still see a number of Nigerians, especially in rural areas, still not wanting to deposit those cash, because since there's a caveat to withdrawing, I might rather just keep it at home. But I think that generally, on a positive note, right, having such a policy generally just ensures that those who deal with large amount of cash, who would not be able to deposit initially as a result of the cap and then the fees associated with excess deposits, would now be able to do that, of course, for those who do not mind going through digital platforms to be able to make transfers, because I think the world is even moving, and businesses in Nigeria really also need to start moving towards that direction. Right now, currency outside the banking sector is around the region of 90 to 91%. If you go to other parts of the world, they have them around 45 to 55%, depending on the region right in the world. And I think we need to start seeing ourselves around them. During the Emefiele's era, we had currency outside bank somewhere around 800 billion at some point. And even if we don't get to that point, I think this policy should be able to encourage a lot more use in terms of the infrastructure that is available.
So you're talking more about encouragement, but then don't you think that, excess withdrawals, which will attract charges of 3% for individuals and 5% for corporates, will actually financially impair businesses when there is a digital downtime and the only option is the cash at hand?
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think I alluded to that initially. That's a great area, because for businesses who really need to make transactions, right, oftentimes rely on this cash payments. But of course, when we have downtime, the chances are they would have to at no point or at most points have to go to the bank to withdraw cash, and that's really a strain on their finances. But again, my sense is that the CBN also wants to force the stakeholders in the industry to be able to live, because to be able to live up to the requirement. Because what you would find now is that there's going to be increased competition in terms of the digital platforms that banks have to offer. Before now, we used to have competitions between neobanks and the normal conventional commercial banks, as well as fintechs. But right now, it's going to be how strong is your services, how easy is your mobile platforms to be able to carry out transactions, and how reliable is your platform. We have a number of this microfinance fintechs in the last few years that have rolled on the robustness of their infrastructure and have grown significantly. What we will see now is that a lot more competition will be there, and they will be able to, improve on their IT. But in the meantime, it's going to be a strain on businesses whenever we have this form of downtime.
Well, we've not seen traditional banks improve on their APIs and improve on their back-end platforms, most especially as it involves people wanting to do more of digital transaction than physical cash. Now, don't you think that might probably edge them out when we have more fintechs venturing into that and seeming to have more robust and efficient platforms to help people transact their businesses?
Well, I'm not so sure that I would agree with you that banks have not improved their infrastructure. I think to a large extent, because what we've seen in the last 2-3 years, post that pronouncement during the Emefiele's era was that a number of banks had to improve and upgrade the version of their mobile applications. And when you look at their finances also, you've seen a huge amount of investment channeled towards technology. And what we even do see is that a number of these commercial banks have also set up fintech companies that they now partner with in ensuring that their transactions are relatively seamless. Of course, I would agree to the extent that there needs to be huge amount of improvement also if we are able to bring a lot more Nigerians into the financial system and to the digital financial system. In terms of fintechs edging commercial banks, well, again, that's a competition that I was talking about. We've seen where banks are now partnering with fintechs. We've seen a number of fintechs also go down. We've seen banks who are willing to digitize their system also done well. We can mention a number of banks that have done relatively well in that aspect. But doing well is not enough, because now it is now a competition of who offers the best services, who offers the most reliable platform, and those are people that will win. And Nigerians are not shy to switch bank accounts. In fact, right now in Nigeria, an average Nigerian probably have up to 8, 9, 10 accounts, right? Depending on which one offers them the best services, and they are they would easily move. So if they have that form of competition, of course, the banks would have to sit tight, as well as the fintechs.
Okay, so then what risks do you see in this fiscal cash curb usage? Probably there are none anyway. And how does this new policy now address money laundering concerns?
Oh, well, so first to the risk, I think for every policy there are always risks, right? There are always loopholes that, of course, Nigerians would still try to find a way around. But I think generally, when you look at the informal split of Nigeria, a huge part, like I said, over 42% is still informal. We have a lot of rural areas in Nigeria that still deal in cash, right? Of course, maybe they don't deal with significant amount of cash to the tune of 500,000 per week, but you could still find some areas where they have to deal with that much. Of course, if you're trying to drive digital usage, we need that level of education also spread across the country. And unfortunately, fortunately, it is not just on the banking system also. It also moves towards the telecommunications sector, who would naturally want to invest in the catchment areas where we have a lot more development. But then again, we need to start looking at how we start moving some of these networks, be it fiber networks, 4G, 5G, into other regions of the country who would probably see as rural areas, but of course need, this facility to be able to access financial technological service. So I think those are great areas that we would likely see. In terms of financial laundering, money laundering, I think it covers it to a large extent. One of the conversations that happened earlier on during 2022-2023 was that cash were being held in the bid to promote or whatever in terms of corrupt practices for the election. And I think if we're able to reduce that now, we could be able to hold on that. A number of money laundering activities are done using cash, right? And then they find a way to would I call it clean it now, either through real estate or some other forms of transactions. I think when you reduce the volume that you can transact with, it helps you to a large extent to be able to curb laundering. But it doesn't mean that people will still find ways. But of course, it means that the system to a large extent has put in a tight leash around it, and that should help reduce those form of laundering activities.
Okay. Now, another aspect we need to look at is the automated teller machines. According to the CBN governor, daily withdrawal remains capped at 100,000 naira per customer with a maximum of 500,000 naira a week. But then even the machines are rarely with cash. I mean, I can't remember the last time I used my card to access cash from the ATM machine. You probably would want to use the POS operator. But don't you think that is one area that the Apex Bank should equally look into? I mean, to just aid fiscal liquidity of cash for those who probably might just want to do some minimal transactions here and there.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's also a challenge, right? We've had complaints in recent times where a number of people hardly find cash. To be honest, I don't know the last time I've held Nigerian cash anymore, to be honest, right? And that speaks to the level of digitization that we're moving into. But then again, when a number of Nigerians want to access the ATM, we've had that complaints of lack of cash there, and then at the end of the day, having to go through POS, and then POS agents charging premium. But I think this also helps to support the initial circular that was also released by the CBN sometime about 2 months ago around agency banking in Nigeria, where POS agents can only use one particular principal now in terms of a bank now, and then they're also capped in terms of transactions that they can carry out daily, which also means that they have disincentivized the premium that POS would largely have. So even if they have access to a lot of cash from the CBN, they probably will not be able to do a lot with it because of those cap that has been put in there by the CBN. But I agree to the point that the CBN needs to now be deliberate. We've seen them move around that sometime last year, where they ensured that banks were having cash available in their ATMs. But I think they need to now ensure that that is being done, follow through the implementation, and have heavy fines for banks where there are complaints that they don't have cash. Because again, if you're trying to come up with a policy that ensures that people have limited cash when they need it, then I think the bank should be able to avail that to the customers when they do, and rather than give it to POS agents at a premium. So yes, the CBN should be able to do that.
Well, we see that the POS operators, easily and largely access cash more than ordinary Nigerians. So with this latest measure, I mean, we want to look at it from consumer behavior. Do you think that Nigerians will, experience more withdrawal times at ATM points, or do you think they would just be more satisfied with having to patronize POS operators? I mean, if there's an issue with having to do online transaction and there's a POS operator somewhere close by, doesn't that give some sort of convenience rather than, other options?
So again, agency banking, POS, right, is meant to help. It's just like serving what a microfinance serves, right? It's supposed to help people with mega transactions and small money transactions. I believe that when the technology is right, Nigerians would have no reason to go through POS for huge ticket transactions. But of course, POS still offers that level of convenience for those who don't have to travel distances to the banks or ATM ports to be able to withdraw, can always do that with our POS. But then again, when it's huge transaction, because of this caveat around cash, you just have to make use of digital platforms to do your transactions. Long queues, I don't think so. I believe and I hope that a lot more of education is done, because what we had that time was there was no education to the public. Immediately policy came up, we had a lot of queues at ATM ports. POS agents increased their charges also, and it just caused a whole lot of hullabaloo around. But now maybe we have learned, and I'm hoping that the CBN should be able to, as much as possible, enlighten the public as to the implications of this policy. And again, I believe that's what we're also doing here, the implications for individuals and businesses, so that we do not panic and start running after cash, because I don't think that's going to be the situation. If we're able to do that, I don't think would see so much shocks in terms of our normal way of life.
All right. Now, talking about regulation, Samuel, what does mandatory monthly reporting to the CBN supervisory units mean now for transparency and compliance?
I think it speaks a lot, right? One of the issues that you tend to find in different systems is that the level of transparency, reporting, oversight might not be as tight as you would desire. But what the CBN would want to do here is to ensure that every bank, just like, again, like I mentioned, the agency banking circular that was released the last 2 months, where POS agents and other agents have to file reports on a weekly or monthly basis to their principal, which is the bank. Now, the bank also have to compile same and also send to the CBN. It helps them to be able to monitor everything that is being done. Of course, if you look at the circular again, there's a point where the amounts that they make from those excess withdrawals has to be splitted 60% to the CBN and 40% to banks. Of course, it also helps the CBN to be able to understand and be able to rationally understand how much banks have made from this excess withdrawal and how they do their sharing formula. But beyond that, it also helps the CBN to be able to adjust their policies where needed and improve on them if there is need, and also to see which banks might be circumventing some of those rules, and then of course heavy fines for those where necessary. So I think it is quite necessary, right, for there to be very tight leash on reporting in a bid to ensure that we have good transparency, and that should also translate to other benefits across the financial ecosystem.
So yeah, we're talking about policy measures to improve and make efficient Nigeria's financial system, but then government institutions are free from these new set of rules. So how does that really curb corruption within Nigerian agencies and government circles?
Okay, so I'll try to quote the document. The document says that revenue generating accounts of federal, state, and local governments are exempted. So my sense is that those units from those arms of government, be it the Internal Revenue Service or for customs and whatnot, are exempted. I understand the exemptions to the point of deposit, but to the point of withdrawal, I really do not understand, because then again, these agencies are not meant to be dispensing cash to anyone. I don't see reason why they need to spend cash, which is one of the gray areas that I see with the policy, and might really need some relooking and some retooling around. Because if you're going to exempt the likes of embassies, diplomatic missions, you removed the exemptions for those ones who probably would need cash to be able to do things around social security nets, social security safety nets, around helping Nigerians who are the very lowest cadre, right, of the social class. And most of these things are cash, are enabled by cash. If you are going to be taking them away from those exemptions, and then government revenue generating agencies are now being exempted from this, I think it's a mismatch. I don't know to the point where it's going to in any way encourage corruption or not, but in its sense, they do not need it because they do not spend cash. And I know that the government in recent time, through a number of policies, have tried to encourage digitized spending so that you are able to trace transactions. So if you are doing that and then you are also allowing them access to cash, it's like a mismatch between the various policies over the last few years. So for me, yes, that's a gray area, and it could also be manipulated towards corruption and any other mismanagements that you can think of.
Okay, well, we'll see how it goes anyway. I mean, we are going to continue to scrutinize and talk about the CBN policies and see how that would actually help holistically Nigeria's financial ecosystem as we gradually pivot towards a cashless policy that would be probably totally driven by technology. Samuel Oyekanmi, lead research and insights at Norrenberger, thank you so much for your time on the show.